You are now listening to the Palm Pod, brought to you by RSPO, a global partnership to make palm oil sustainable. Hi, I'm Fara Rom, and you're tuning into the Palm Pod, where we host engaging discussions, expert insights, and industry updates on sustainable palm oil, guiding consumers and businesses to make better choices for the planet. So before palm oil became a globally traded commodity found in countless products on store shelves, it was and still is West Africa's red gold. More than just an ingredient, the oil palm has profoundly shaped the history, cuisine, culture, and livelihoods of communities across the region and beyond. From the rich, hearty egusi soup of Nigeria to the vibrant palava sauce of Ghana, palm oil remains a cornerstone of West African cooking. But its significance extends far beyond the kitchen. It has long played a role in rituals, traditional medicine, and trade, forming an integral part of cultural identity and economic resilience across generations. Today, countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone, with Nigeria being Africa's largest producer, are making strides towards sustainable palm oil production, striving to honor tradition while safeguarding the future of this invaluable resource. To explore this interesting topic deeper, we're thrilled to welcome Ozoz Sokoh, food historian, writer, and culinary anthropologist. Ozoz has been instrumental in documenting and celebrating West Africa's culinary heritage. In this episode, we'll dive into why palm oil is irreplaceable in African cuisine, uncover its historical and cultural significance, and discuss how we can reshape the global narrative around this essential and often misunderstood ingredient. Welcome, Ozoz, to the Palm Pod.
Thank you very much, Farah. It's my pleasure to be here.
So, I've mentioned a little bit about your background, but we want to hear from you. Can you share your journey in becoming a food historian?
Before I share my journey, I'd like to acknowledge that I live in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and I live and work on Indigenous lands that have nourished and sustained Indigenous communities and First Nations people for decades. I think that any discussion around palm oil connects back to land. And, when I think back to my journey as a food historian, debut cookbook author now of the Nigerian cookbook Chop Chop, it actually started with me, a geologist. So I didn't start out my career working with food. I was working as a geologist, not really happy with that career choice, and found myself being drawn towards eating and documenting and journaling ingredients I was coming across. At the time, I lived in the Netherlands. And I was fascinated by all of these new ingredients I was discovering, new recipes I was learning to make, I was learning to bake. And so I started writing a blog called Kitchen Butterfly about the culinary journey. In 2009, I went out to dinner with colleagues at work, and one of them was a Brazilian, Santiago, and he started talking about foods from home. And, we were having chats about what foods we missed, and he, without saying the name, starts describing this fritter. And he was like, there's this fritter, it's fried in dende, which is the Brazilian Portuguese name for palm oil. And the more he talks, the more puzzled I look, because I recognize what he's talking about. But in my mind, I'm like, how did it get to Brazil? I wasn't really thinking about transatlantic enslavement of people. I credit that encounter, learning about Brazilian acarajé from Santiago, with kind of pushing me into this sphere of exploring, researching, and documenting food history. Because prior to that, I was interested in food, but the historical, the heritage aspects, the legacy, I hadn't really thought, a lot about those. So that was the start of the journey, and I kind of haven't looked back since, because I found that not only the equivalents of Nigerian akara and Brazilian acarajé everywhere across the Black Atlantic. You have versions in Haiti, you have versions in Jamaica, Barbados. But I found other dishes, utensils, drinks that connect different cultures and cuisines across geographies.
So I think it's really interesting to see how history really shapes our cuisines and how actually interconnected we are without us knowing. If we don't have people like you, like a food historian, we wouldn't know what's the origin of certain food and how this is one country is related to the other. So understandably you are Nigerian.
Mm-hmm.
You're born in Nigeria.
Yep.
So what sparked your passion for Nigerian and African cuisine? And I think you mentioned also about the cookbook that is just out, which is Chop Chop, which
Yeah.
I'm yet to buy. I'm definitely excited for that. But you can also talk a little bit about the formation of the documentation of these food traditions in your cookbook or other works.
What sparked my passion and interest in documenting Nigerian and West African cuisine was this encounter with Santiago and what it unveiled. That there was a lot more about Nigerian culture and cuisine that I didn't realize. I had always loved Nigerian cuisine. Well, I say always, but let's say since I was 9, because prior to that, I didn't really like eating, I didn't enjoy food. But there was almost this embodied knowledge, flavors, love for the food. It's the documentation that came later. And I found it really fascinating to learn about myself through food, to learn about the things that brought me comfort, but also to learn about this interconnectedness that you spoke of, a few minutes ago, and how across West Africa there are all these threads. Across tropical climates, there are all these similar trends, whether it's the way we use palm products, coconut, date, oil palms, and just those connections really fascinated me. And I wanted to learn more about what Nigerian food history was, what culinary history existed, because I was also aware that there was culinary history of the Netherlands where I lived, or France, or the UK, the Britain. And so I was like, Nigeria has culinary history. What is it? Where is it hidden? And how do I unearth it? And so I started the journey of basically researching everyday foods, like salt. Like, where did Nigerian salt come from? And does Nigerian salt have history? And what I found was that every element that plays a role in Nigerian cuisine today, in the flavors and the textures, in the combinations, has had some history, known, unknown, documented, and I guess that fascinates me. And so I started documenting things on my blog, but also on my website called Feast Afrique, kind of researching, writing, putting together information about the histories, cultures, culinary traditions, and that has culminated in my debut cookbook, Chop Chop Cooking the Food of Nigeria, where I do a deep dive into the ingredients, the culture, the cuisine, the recipes, and more. So definitely get your copy.
Yes. And we want to dive a bit deeper into why is palm oil considered a staple ingredient in African cooking. And as we can see in different countries, for instance, there's a dish that is quite similar to one another, but also when it comes to palm oil, it is being used in different countries. So it's quite fascinating for myself and probably the audience to know how did it become a staple? How long has palm oil been a part of African cuisine and also African traditions in general?
Ooh, documented, there has been evidence of palm oil from the 15th, 16th century. There are records of travelers, enslavers, both leaving the continent, but also in Brazil, Portugal, writing about the oil palm, writing about the fruits, but also the oil that comes from it. And we know that it must have existed prior to these early documents. I'd definitely say centuries. It is one of the very first oils to be used in cooking, but also medicinally, also spiritually, and remains prominent and important today as well.
Okay, now we want to know a little bit about you. So, do you have a personal take or cultural memories that tied to palm oil? Because I think I've gone through when I was looking for your name online. I looked at this Instagram page that has pictures, beautiful, beautiful pictures of palm oil. It's super red, and there's this emotion that is evoking from that picture. So I guess you have an interesting story that you want to tell about palm oil.
In some countries, people enjoy eating boiled potatoes with butter. The equivalent for me is eating boiled yam with palm oil that's salted with a tiny bit of, we call it dry pepper in Nigeria, but it's like cayenne pepper, but also not eating with cutlery, eating with my hands, like hot, fresh, boiled yam
I
from
can imagine that.
from the south of Nigeria, particularly yam from Edo State, where I'm from,
Mm-hmm.
with correct palm oil. It's like nothing compares. And there's a lushness to the palm oil. There's a savoriness, a smokiness, sweetness, something, notes of carrot. So, you have that earthy sweetness, but there's also something a little bit astringent, not quite sour, not quite tart, but a little bit dry on the tongue. And yeah, it is heavenly. That's my, yeah, that's definitely
Your
some.
moment.
That's, yes. I'm lost for
I can
words, but
imagine.
yeah. Boiled yam and palm oil, yeah, the epitome of deliciousness.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are salivating right now, and there's a lot of different approaches that are taken in culinary, right? Like there's so many things that we are yet to learn. Like for myself, even I just started cooking Nigerian food, so yeah, there's that interesting mix to different things, and I definitely will try whatever you said just now. Um, and speaking of palm oil's role in food, let's move on to the culinary significance across Africa. Are there regional differences in how palm oil is used across the region?
In Nigeria, we also use palm oil to make creamy dressings, like emulsions, where we combine the palm oil with waters that are rich in alkalis. So it's either we soak potash, which is like a mined alkali salt, in water, or we soak culinary ashes, like ashes from palm fronds or palm fibers, and they're very rich in potassium and carbonate salts, and we steep them in water, and we create something like it's not exactly lye water, but it's similar in function to lye water, and it has the unique quality that it can make oil and water mix into a perfect emulsion in the right proportions. And so you end up with this creamy orange sauce that coats vegetables with just a lushness. And so we use it in, we toss meats in it, specialty meats like cow foot and goat head, but we also toss vegetables like cassava and herbs and peppers and onions in it in a dish called abacha. Actually, There's a dish on the cover of my cookbook, and it is this exact dish that I'm describing of dried cassava rehydrated and tossed in this emulsion of palm oil and alkali water to make what we call abacha.
You're really making me really, really interested in knowing more about this. And again, I'm definitely getting that book. Um, it's interesting how when you describe um palm oil or the use of oil palm, it actually goes back where the ancestors before they know how to, or they experiment actually, and even using different parts of the oil palm. So it's really really interesting. um and as you mentioned, and this is something new for myself too, when you mentioned about palm oil being used as a dressing, it's really like out of my head, like, oh, how does that look like? So that's interesting. But I want to touch about, what do you think are the unique qualities that palm oil bring to African dishes in terms of the taste, texture, and color? So what are the extra points that actually, comparing to like different oil, they have like this distinct taste. If you're talking about salads, there's a distinct taste that you can remember. So like, what does really palm oil bring to African dishes that make it, African dishes?
Definitely, uh, minus the health benefits, it brings amazing color. So you can imagine you have this bright orange oil kind of rippled through sauces. It's very different from when you have like a light yellow, neutralish color. So
Mm-hmm.
it definitely brings a vibrance to dishes. The unique flavor combinations, that is, the floral, smoky, slightly sweet notes, when combined with greens, as are common in Nigerian and West African cooking, nuts and seeds, works really, really well. It's like you get this, the slight smokiness carries through the sauce. You taste the oil. It completes the dish. It kind of rounds off the flavors. Yeah. So color, flavor, balance. It brings a lot.
That's great. And for personally, I also started. So there's this brand that has red palm oil here, and I'm just fascinated by how it changes like the look of the dishes that I usually cook. So that's like really really interesting. Um, so beyond the kitchen, right? Perspectives on palm oil have evolved over time, and you are talking about indigenous lands, and that's how crops, definitely, different types of crops. It involves the cultivation of land. So let's talk a bit about how its perception has changed. From your point of view, from your perspective, has the perception or use of palm oil changed in modern African cooking? And especially with many negative sentiments played over the years.
I think there's a general sentiment that I've heard and that I refute and I reject, that palm oil is unhealthy. And so I've come across some statements online, even in person, and people are like, palm oil is unhealthy.
Mhm.
Like, well, it has the same nutritional values, like for like, as any other oil. A tablespoon, I think, is 120 calories. So, yeah, you can talk about saturated, unsaturated. I think the discrimination against palm oil goes deeper and a lot further back in time. Because if you read research papers from, documenting events from like the 16th or 17th century, their notes talking about how there was a conversation about leading rulers in Brazil and Portugal um, discarding palm oil because it was associated with enslaved people. And that led to a comparison with olive oil, with the conclusion uh, being that olive oil was better than palm oil. But that is founded on a racist assumption because palm oil was associated with people of African origin and was dismissed. And you see that mentality and that mindset carry through 300-400 years on. We're not comparing the same oils when we talk about palm oil versus olive oil. And also, there's also no need to compare them because they're not used in the same way. They have different cultural significance for different people. I would never rubbish olive oil because I understand that it has cultural significance for Italians and Tunisians and Algerians. And I also expect that same respect to be accorded to me for my cultural foods.
And I think the context that you're talking about is not often heard. And I think also with growing production of things around us, a lot of people don't really thought about the sentiment, where the sentiment's coming from, what's the origin of these commodities or like this ingredient that we're talking about. And it's not limited to only palm oil. Um, from your observation, do you think younger generations, especially Africans, like are they moving away from using palm oil, or is it widely embraced? We know a lot of the conversation in the global north is quite negative, but I think we want to focus on, our African people still embraces the use of palm oil as they do back then.
Data, I'd say, is key, and I don't have that data. However, I do have 3 teenagers, and they still eat all the things that I make with palm oil. Like, they've never once said, no, use an alternative oil. They don't cook much. Like, they don't cook a lot of Nigerian food. Like, they wouldn't make soups. They cook Nigerian food, but they wouldn't make soups because they're always like, Mama, you're here and you can make it. So I don't have the answers, essentially, what I'm saying. However, I do make a case for us educating people about the origins of some of these discriminatory biases against palm oil. And I know that there's space in future to kind of build people's knowledge and competence and understanding of how sometimes the media can shape and frame things and demonize ingredients by either conflating things or withholding some information. And I think palm oil is one of those topics that it's so important to make the distinction between community grown red palm oil versus commodified, industrial, fractionated, bleached, deodorized palm oil. Very different things. And actually, in the global north, present in majority of the ingredients that you find on the store shelves. So I kind of feel like there's a little bit of hypocrisy to have this outcry against palm oil when practically every ingredient you pick up on a store shelf has the same palm oil in it. And it's the cash crop, highly processed, versus the food crop, hardly processed. We need to separate them. And I think that's really important.
And I believe also there's a different take to this, definitely. And for example, like in Southeast Asia, we don't really use the red palm. But at the same time, because of our history, we already adopted that, usage of palm oil, and it has become part of our culinary history or significance, aside from the economic drive that palm oil contributes to. For example, like in Thailand, it's mostly for farmers. Small farmers are the one who cultivate palm oil. So I think it's a lot more nuanced. Definitely, like different people have different perspective of palm oil. But I think also there's a growing misinformation about how palm oil is demonized, and this doesn't just affect the countries in the global north, it also includes countries like Malaysia itself, since we're also one of the biggest grower of palm oil. So I think it's definitely important to be more critical about, especially, the boycott movements and stuff like that. Um, how do you think we can balance preserving culinary traditions, especially for your own African traditions, while promoting sustainability in palm oil production? Because, like I mentioned, Nigeria is one of the biggest producer of palm oil in Africa, and there's already like a growing export, and it's also helping the economies and things like that. So, how do you think, in a food historian perspective, how can we balance that?
The one thing I deeply admire about Nigerian culinary traditions is that sustainability is at the heart of them. And there's an approach to using the whole plant or the whole animal in some cases. We're not prone to waste. And so when I think about the journey of upholding culinary traditions alongside doing things sustainably, I think they're part of the same kind of spectrum that Nigerians are predisposed to. Is there additional education that could be beneficial? No doubt. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of new knowledge coming out on, whether that is spacing of the plants or water usage and things like that. Obviously, ways to improve and to adopt newer growing methods. But generally, palm nuts too are kind of self-starting. Like in many ways, at least historically, they resisted being confined to certain locations. Like they would just randomly, the seeds would disperse and they would randomly grow. And so they kind of resisted plantationing in many ways. But today, I guess there are many possibilities and many approaches. I think that it's important to find balance because we do want a world for our children's children to live in, to continue to enjoy these ingredients, beyond our time here. So for sure, I think that there are many ways that we could adopt new practices to encourage sustainability.
What's one key takeaway you would like listeners to remember about palm oil and its cultural significance? And maybe if you have one or two words saying that, this is what I believe in and this is what you should think about.
The media often conflates things. I think doing your own research is important. Red unprocessed palm oil is a food crop that is distinct, different from commercial cash crop processed palm oil. They look different, they're different, they have different cultural significances. Foods that are connected to Nigerian and African cuisine should not be demonized right out the gate. And comparisons like olive oil versus palm oil are really apple and orange, and they're not meaningful in advocating for whatever it is. And so it's important for people to respect and honor culinary traditions wherever they come from, whether or not you understand them. The final thing is that the consumer is often at the heart of these issues that lead to overconsumption and kind of dial back or connect to what people are growing and where people are growing things. Historically, for instance, the love for sugar led to massive enslavement of Africans and the construction of plantations from the Canary Islands all the way to Brazil. So at the heart of it, us as consumers, there's certain levels of knowledge and research and ownership and responsibility that we have to take for what ends up on our shelves. Obviously, big business is also doing its own thing. And the media is also doing its own thing by not being 100% honest about the issues. So it's a mix of things. I just say people should listen to podcasts like this and learn a little bit more. We're all on journeys of discovery, right? So we're kind of building our knowledge base. So yeah, let's read, watch, learn, listen, and respect.
Definitely. And as we talk about the history of palm oil concerning African region, in history doesn't stop there. And like I mentioned about what has happened in the world has shaped one way or another on how, for example, like certain countries in Southeast Asia consume their food and the choice of oil that they use. So history is evolving. So I think also at the same time, one of the key takeaways that I get from our discussion today is more of being a conscious consumer in any shape or form, but definitely taking pride of the cultural history in the culinary of where you're coming from, and there's a lot to learn from other regions as well. And with the discussion today, palm oil's influence stretches beyond West Africa now, and it has become an integral part of the histories and economies of India, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And as we celebrate its cultural and culinary significance, we must also ensure that the production evolves responsibly, striving for a more sustainable future. And I think that's somehow something that all of us can agree with. We want others to enjoy, different generations to enjoy what we're enjoying now, but at the same time you always have to make sure that we have a sustainable development throughout. So Ozoz, it has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing such incredible descriptive, when we're talking about food, it's always about how you critique it. I feel like I really appreciate that, and thank you so much for your insights and helping us appreciate the deep history, culture, and future of palm oil.
Thank you for having me on. I had a great time. Yeah, thank you.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Palm Pot on your favorite podcasting platforms. Feel free to share your feedback for our next episode and have a wonderful day. I was speaking to our guest, Ozoz Sokoh, food historian and the author of Chop Chop Cooking the Food of Nigeria. I am Fara Rom, and this is the Palm Pot.